week 41 of 2021. This is your weekly fix. I'm Smitha Nair. Last Friday, the following conversation played out in the Supreme Court over the Uttar Pradesh police's failure to arrest the son of Union Minister Ajay Mishra. Ashish Mishra was allegedly behind the wheels of the SUV that ran over protesters at Lakhimpur Kheri. The bench asked the lawyer representing the UP government, "This is an offence registered under Section 302, murder. Do you treat everyone in the same manner, issue notice and then wait for them to appear? Will an accused in every part of the country be treated in the same way, like in the present case, giving them an invitation that you please come?" Elsewhere, a Delhi court had harsh words for the Delhi police, describing its investigation in one of the many cases of the 2020 riots as callous. The court stated that the investigating agency has merely tried to pull the wool over the court's eyes and nothing else. Exactly a year ago, Siddique Kappan, a journalist from Kerala, was arrested while on his way to Uttar Pradesh's Hathras district to report on the rape and murder of a Dalit girl. The UP Special Task Force has, in its charge sheet, said that Kappan did not write like, quote, a responsible journalist and reported events to, quote, incite Muslims. The Editors Guild of India has highlighted several instances of state persecution of journalists and warned of its chilling effects on media freedom. A couple of days ago, the police in Indore, at the behest of the Bajrang Dal, arrested 4 Muslim men, 2 of them students, for attending a Garba event in their college. The Bajrang Dal and the VHP had issued a diktat in the state that non-Hindus not be allowed entry into Garba events. Madhya Pradesh has a BJP government in power. That the police and other agencies are used as blunt instruments of the state is known and worryingly normalized. In his recently released book, The Silent Coup, veteran investigative journalist Josy Joseph details how the non-military security establishment has been manipulated by the political executive for decades to target adversaries, create false narratives, suppress dissent, and subvert the constitution. He joins us on the podcast. Thank you, Josy Joseph, for making time to speak to us.
Thank you, Smitha. It's always good to talk to you.
I was wondering if you could analyze, dissect a few recent high-profile cases that are at different stages of investigation/trial and involve different agencies. And tell us if they in any way speak to the malaise afflicting India's security agencies that your book so powerfully documents. The first involves the agency that's been in the headlines through 2020 and also now the Narcotics Control Bureau, the NCB. The Bombay High Court, while granting bail to Riya Chakrabarti last year, described as highly disproportionate and extremely unreasonable the NCB's contention that she financed and harbored her friend Sushant Singh Rajput's drug habit.
Yeah.
The agency had claimed that she was part of a drug syndicate. Now, the court in its order stated that she's not part of the chain of drug dealers. Television news, as has been its wont, played a big role in fanning conspiracy theories in the so-called Justice for SSR campaign, which then, of course, went on to become a part of the BJP and JDU's election campaign in Bihar. Now, in the case of actor Shah Rukh Khan's son, he was admittedly not found in possession of any narcotic substances. No blood tests were reportedly carried out to determine consumption.
Yeah.
Per the agency, they found incriminating material in WhatsApp chats on Khan's phone, the device they accessed after his detention, that they claim showed links to international drug trafficking. Let's take a look at what appear to be procedural lapses. It has been alleged that the 2 men seen holding Aryan Khan's hand and that of another accused and leading them toward the Narcotics Control Bureau office are a BJP member who was also, it seems, the informant, and a private detective who has a case against him. The agency says they were independent witnesses or panchas. It would seem, as per rules, they are ineligible. Further, a Nationalist Congress Party leader has claimed that a BJP leader's relative had been detained and later released during the raids, and that Aryan Khan had gone to the party on an invitation by that person.
Yeah.
I was curious to know how you view the agency's conduct in this case specifically, and how correct is the observation made in some quarters about police and other agencies every now and then playing loose and fast with arrest procedures, panchnamas, etc.
Yeah, so there are various aspects to Smita what you're asking. Number one, and the most important thing that the most immediate thing to address is the arrest of this young man, Shah Rukh Khan's son, and his custody. There are two aspects. One is the question, why has he been arrested at all? Because about 20 years ago, we started, and all societies, especially the Indian democracy, over the last several years, there is a decriminalization and modernization of the justice system that has been happening as a project which may not look as a single piece, but for example, we used to have this called the FERA, Foreign Exchange Regulation Act, Draconian. People used to be arrested and put in jail, which was replaced by FEMA. The law on narcotics was amended in 2001 to target, the people who bring in the drugs and distribute, the sellers, not the users, because the user is a victim.
Right.
So the NDPS Act, which is called the Narcotic Drugs and Psychotropic Substances Act 1985, is a British colonial era. Originates from there, but the Act in 1985, which is passed, has further been amended later on in 2001. Entire presumption for the 2001 amendment was that the law is not meant to target an addict who is actually a victim. The law was to target at stopping the menace of drugs, the sellers, the distributors, the suppliers. So the law should be tough on when you recover that billions of dollars worth of drugs in the Mundra port, not on Aryan Khan.
Right.
The third part of his arrest which is very much central to the argument that I made in my new book, The Silent Coup, which is that over the years, Indian political class, and in that Narendra Modi government stands out, has mastered the art of misusing the non-military arms of the state, the police, the Enforcement Directorate, the CBI, the Narcotics Control Bureau, etc., to create a certain narrative, to silence their opponents, to target their rivals, and target individuals very selectively. And the last part of it, which is what you spoke about, those two men who were part of the raid, they fit into the other part of the argument that I have been making, which is that in this country, we have a recession-proof industry called informants, police, NCB, Enforcement Directorate, CBI, all of them have informants. And these informants invariably are petty criminals, shady characters. And you look at the two who are in that frame. One of them is wanted in some cases. The other fellow is small-time political leader. And who gives him, even if he's your witness, who gives him the right to almost drag an arrested person to the police or into the custody? And what procedure is it?
Right. Your book ends where the Delhi riots begin.
Yeah.
You write that the NIA is, of course, far from the only agency that the political executive has wielded to scuttle Indian democracy. The Delhi police, for instance, is another visible sign of the frightening rot that has set into the system. And then you detail what happened on the 23rd of February 2020 with Kapil Mishra addressing the group of supporters and issuing an ultimatum right when the police were standing next to him. You end by saying the police officer quietly walked out of the frame. Then began the riots. Now, curiously, 3 days later, the Delhi police told the High Court they had not seen Kapil Mishra's speech. The judge ordered the video be played while commenting, there are so many TVs in your office. How can a police officer say he hasn't watched the videos? I'm really appalled by the state of affairs of the Delhi police. Months later, the Delhi police, in its affidavit in the High Court, submitted that the above speech, or indeed the one made by Minister Anurag Thakur, in which he uttered the infamous Goli Maro Salon Ko chant, is no evidence that they played any role in instigating the riots.
Yeah.
Now, now, 1 year and 8 months after the riots, multiple charge sheets have been filed implicating mostly activists and students. Help us understand the role, the motivations perhaps of the Delhi police in riot cases in particular.
So, if you look at Delhi police, its behavior over ever since Narendra Modi government came to power, the one word to use it is shameful. Uh, a police force which largely had a very good reputation has been reduced to street goons and blatant liars
Hmm.
and enablers of certain narratives. And in that, I think Delhi police can claim credit of setting new standards along with NIA and now NCB. These agency bosses and those people from IPS and IRS who have qualified, come into service, was passing very prestigious exams. I don't know how they go to sleep in the night after lying through the teeth in their day, and after terrorizing the tormented, after standing with the criminals and exonerating, after so meekly serving the ruling government, the ruling parties, very blatantly communal narratives.
Hmm.
So, when tomorrow, one day in the future, when historians sit down to write the history of our times these days, Smitha, trust me, many of these Delhi police officers and their claims would find very special mention for uh, destroying or trying to destroy the world's largest democracy. There is no doubt about that.
Right.
It may not be music to ears, but the fact is that the Narendra Modi regime has torn apart the last shreds of moral fiber that we had in public life by all kinds of ministers and people that is lording over. And Delhi police is one of the key enablers of that immoral, almost amoral Modi regime that we have today. And I'm sorry to say that the media, mainstream media, in mostly the mainstream media, and most of the institutions have all been active participant in the rise and dominance of this immoral regime.
Right. And this regime, you tell us, in many ways has picked up from, built on the corroding of institutions from the Indira Gandhi playbook.
Sorry if I was sounding very anti-Modi. It is not the intent. The book is not an anti-Modi book. The book is a look at what has happened to Indian democracy from over the last 4 or 5 decades, which is very, in many ways, unique because while the other countries in the region that came out of the old Indian subcontinent, both Pakistan and Bangladesh, have been victims of military coups,
Hmm.
and democracies around the world have largely been subverted by military tanks and on the road and take over of your radio and television stations. In India, the subversion of democracy started not with the by the military, but by the misuse of the non-military arms of the security establishment, the police, the income tax, the 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 CBI, the Enforcement Directorate, etc.
Hmm.
And my book places it against the context of emergency because I think Indira Gandhi and her coterie were the first ones to misuse these arms of the state at a scale that was scary and that also created the framework which now Narendra Modi is very happily copying.
Hmm.
You see the way the Congress regime has nurtured Bhindranwale in Punjab, and then when he got out of hand, how it securitized the entire situation, and even today thousands of Sikhs do not know where their dear ones have disappeared. How the Congress governments have encouraged a state culture of state-sponsored encounter killings, fake encounter killings, which again Gujarat Modi government has successfully implemented and came through. The difference is that the entire Gujarat fake encounters also had a very direct political context, which was that all those so-called terrorists were coming to kill Narendra Modi, and Mr. Modi built his image of this anti-terrorist, which also indirectly means almost Islamophobic leadership based on those fake encounters. So the book is set against the larger context of it, but as journalists and writers, we have a responsibility to talk about here and now.
Right. And talking about the now and here has got several journalists in trouble. What role do you see the police and other agencies as having played in targeting journalists and what they write, in how exceptional laws like the UAPA and sedition are weaponized to clamp down on reporting unfavorably to whoever is in power? And there's also the other side. I would be remiss if I didn't ask you how client media is used by agencies to create embellished, sometimes fake narratives.
So there are two aspects to your question, Smitha. Number one is about how the claims of these police and agencies are being reported by the mainstream media. There, I have a word of advice to my younger reporter friends in these mainstream media houses. Please don't be so afraid that you crush your soul even before you start your life journey. Your big bosses are minting money because of being propagandists, either a salary or other favors. Do know that. But you youngsters, you don't need to do that. You should walk out of those newsrooms which are forcing you to do propaganda. You will find jobs. You will not die of hunger outside. Trust me. Because people like me have left mainstream media and we haven't died of hunger. That's my request to the youngsters. Please don't become the tools of propaganda. And all of you are in the mainstream. Please trust me. All of you are either silent or you're active part of the propaganda machinery. Number two is the how the police has. Let's talk about the Siddiq Kapan case itself. I have been waiting for the charge sheet, and now that we have a fairly good idea of what is in the charge sheet, it's a very clear case of the police and the state framing an innocent guy, and they're one of the key claims evidence is a series of articles that is returned. See, the articles that he has returned have gone through a certain editorial process. But policemen in this country, whether it's in Siddiq Kapan's case or whether in cases in, I think Manipur, we can see in other cases, where police and other agencies are just passing judgments on journalism, on writing, on opinion. Who in the world has given these policemen the capability and the framework and the right and equip them to pass judgments on journalism? No, they don't have it. What they are doing is that they, by weaponizing journalism, the act of writing, by charging the uncomfortable voices under sedition and other serious laws, what they are doing is that they are assaulting the democracy of this country. And on a normal day, on an average day these days, most of our agencies and the men in uniform in these police forces and CBI, etc., and other agencies are the enemies of democracy. They are not strengthening this democracy. They are the threat to the democracy, and we are all the victims of them.
Right. Why and how has the parliament, the legislature, failed in its role as a watchdog? After all, very often it's the party leaders in the opposition who find a target on their backs. Yet, there seems to be no appetite among our lawmakers to seriously seek accountability from the police forces, from other agencies.
Because the moment you make them accountable and you build systems of accountability, all sides of political classes will lose control and the power to control the narrative and their critics. I hope the opposition wakes up. BJP won't, because BJP is having a field day. BJP is almost, it's almost as if they're celebrating the assault on our constitution. So I hope the opposition wakes up. Whether it's Mamata Banerjee or Rahul Gandhi or Sharad Pawar, they have all been beneficiaries of the misuse of the state institutions in the past. I hope you will put an end to it. I hope all of you become some of them become saints with the past, because otherwise there is no way out. But to add to that, Smitha, there is something that we should not forget. We are in a very unique situation. Even if the words that the opposition is saying about constitutionality, etc., is right, their space for articulating that has been shrunk dramatically by two three actions. One, the mainstream media has deliberately has been ignoring the space to the opposition for years now, ever since Modi came up, because of obviously the way the government bullies the mainstream media.
Hmm.
Number two, Modi government has very actively been working at reducing or weakening the parliamentary oversight of our democracy by bullying through bills without debates, by not even allowing any open debates, and shortening the parliament meetings, etc. So I think we are in a very critical phase that the democratic spaces have shrunk. The anti-democratic forces who enjoy the state power have risen dramatically, and we could well be standing at a cliff edge of losing this democracy to a majoritarian state.
Hmm. Now, while your book details how the process of confronting militancy and insurgencies through the 80s and 90s warped the system,
Mhm.
you underscore that the post 9/11, post 26/11 period provided a carte blanche, in a sense, to agencies. Can you explain this to our listeners?
Yeah, so Narendra Modi in many ways is a product of the post 9/11 global frenzy. Yeah? In fact, he became the chief minister of Gujarat. His first taste of power a few weeks after 9/11 attacks. I think he became in October of that year, and it's that few months of that period is also we also have few months before that we have the Kandahar hijack.
Hmm.
So Kandahar hijack was a humiliating blow for the security agencies, and then 9/11 happens, which gives a global sanction to name anyone who is critical of the state as a terrorist.
Hmm.
And then you see the frenzy going up, and in India, it gave birth. That period gave birth to this staged encounters, very questionable staged police encounters across the country, especially in Delhi and surroundings. And it also gave rise to state governments like Gujarat, which misuse the so-called war on terror to build political narratives very successfully. And that also and that frenzy also fed further into the biases within the agencies. And in that first decade of this millennium, what we see is that our cities are being bombed by two different terrorist groups, the Indian Mujahideen and the Abhinav Bharat. But our chaps, our agencies and police are largely involved in trying to create some fake narrative and arresting innocents, like Wahid, about whom I write in my book.
Hmm.
And every arm, every little tool in that, every little part of that large steam engine called Indian security establishment is actively creating fake narratives, including in narco tests. And that fake narratives becomes such a huge burden that the agencies stop trusting themselves and their news sources. And even as specific alerts were coming in from the Americans and other agencies about threat on Bombay, they do not want to believe it. And Americans obviously are not telling us a complete truth because they knew their source was Headley, but they wanted Headley to help them get Osama bin Laden. But the information that passed on for any smart agency was good enough to save the city. So American selfishness and our own fakery and incompetence together sacrificed the city and the hundreds who died there.
Right.
We haven't come out of it. In fact, that fakery and the misuse of war on terrorism continues. And today, if you look at agencies like NIA, they look like a joke of what they were created for. And I don't know how it is going to be a long struggle to create a professional security establishment in this country from where we are today.
Right. I want to end by reading a stunning portion from your book where you talk about 7/11 Mumbai train blast accused Wahid, who was later acquitted by court, looking forward to the narco test administered by the celebrated narco analyst Dr. S. Malini of FSL in Bengaluru. Wahid, of course, is in the naive hope that this will bring out the truth. And here's how it goes. She asked about the bomb blasts. How many people came and stayed with you? Wahid said, "No one." She asked him to say that 4 people stayed with him. Wahid was silent. "What comes after 3?" she asked. Wahid replied, "4." "Did Pakistanis stay in your house?" Malini asked. Wahid said no. The next question was, "Name India's neighboring countries." Wahid started saying Nepal, Bangladesh, Pakistan, and so on. Through the narco test, a senior officer from the ATS stood next to Malini, instructing her what to ask him and then prompting the answers expected. Well, this is chilling. Can you tell us what sort of damage Dr. Malini did before she was finally let go? And was she in any way held accountable?
She was the famous Dr. Narco who has conducted over 1,000 narco tests, and it is her narco test that became landmark in India's biggest terror and criminal cases, from Telgi case to Sister Abhaya murder case in Kerala to all the big terrorist attacks cases of recent times. But the fact is that she turned out to be a fraud herself. She had forged her certificates. Even when she was dismissed from government service for her fraud and forgery, none of the state polices, none of the federal agencies ever bothered to go back and look at the evidence that she had given them. And it was very clear that she had uh, probably tortured her narco subjects.
Hmm.
It was very clear that in many cases she had doctored the tapes, and in some cases she had completely created fake narratives using very elementary editing of videos and audios. Nobody bothered to investigate. We continue to suffer. A lot of innocents continue to be in jail because of her actions and of the inefficiency of the police forces. And it's very sad to say that a large number of them are actually Muslims.
Right. Josy Joseph, author of The Silent Coup, The History of India's Deep State. Thank you for making the time for us.
Thank you. Thank you, Smitha.
Well, that's it for the moment. I'll be back next Friday.